This video demonstrates atmospheric perspective with a monochromatic watercolor painting. We'll be painting the one-point perspective landscape that we created previously and is featured in an earlier video. Today I'm using one of my palettes I use for urban sketching and landscape painting on scene. I chose to paint my landscape using French ultramarine, which you'll notice is a type of blue. I began my painting by painting in the sky using a gradated wash technique that fades as it gets closer to the horizon line. This is the perfect technique for creating atmosphere. At this stage, if you want to add clouds, you can use a lifting wet paint technique with a tissue before the paint has a chance to fully dry. Since I already drew my clouds in, I did not use this technique. Next, I'm going to paint in the major mass of the landscape, starting in the foreground with more value in color and fade it out as I get closer to the horizon line. Be careful not to use too much water or allow different wet sections to overlap, or your painting might bleed or blend together. You sometimes have to be strategic about which areas you choose to paint in what order in order to prevent this from happening. By using different values in the foreground, middle ground, and background, we not only help to create a sense of space and distance, but also we can help to create a sense of different changes in elevation. As I begin to paint my houses, trees, and other details, I must pay close attention to the direction of the light and ensure that I follow atmospheric perspective rules. Remember that objects will become lighter in value and bluer or grayer as the distance increases. Also, textures and other details fade or blur in the distance. When painting my trees, I'm using a wet on dry technique where I begin with a light wash covering the entire tree. I will work on the other areas while the first layer dries. When painting in the trail, road, or river, don't forget to apply atmospheric perspective. Make sure the value fades in the distance. It might also be a good idea to make this feature a bit lighter or darker than the surrounding landscape so that it shows up clearly. As I paint in my mountains, I begin with the closest mountain first using a medium light tone and lighten my value for the next one. For the furthest mountain, I mix up a very light gray using black. My second wet on dry layer for my tree is slightly darker than the first for a medium layer. Remember that even this layer should fade a bit in the distance. This layer only covers about 75% of the first layer and helps develop texture and form. While this layer dries, I can touch up some other areas and then begin adding texture to the foreground in the form of grass, plants, and dirt. For the final layer of my trees, I mix up a dark blue for the shadow tones and apply it to only about 25% of the tree, mostly on the bottom and the side farthest from the light source. I then finish my textures and details off with a pen, creating more details and textures in the foreground and fading them off in the distance. Lastly, I can clean up any spills or mistakes using a lifting dry paint technique. Thank you for watching. See you next time at Stecker Studios.